We've collected a bunch of miniatures over the years, and we don't have a character associated with most of them. Each episode, I'll do a writing exercise where I pick one, select a game system to stat them out, add some story flavor, and write it in the big book. You're watching a mini-review. And welcome to an experimental new series I was thinking of trying out. The intro has already explained what I intend to do, and I've selected my miniature, so without further ado, let's just get started. The miniature I decided to do first, and decided to focus my efforts on, was this one. I called her the Blue Knight when I first painted her. It's probably been about a year since I've done her. I wanted to experiment with making a knight who was actually very, very colorful. I don't like seeing nothing but knights with just, typical silver armor. It's fine to have it a little bit, but I like to try out a few different things. So for this one, I obviously gave her sort of like a blonde hair, not a lot of highlighting work. This is one of my older miniatures. You can see the glossing as a result of the sealant that I used. I probably would have used a matte sealer now, but I wanted to use up a nice sort of glossy one that I had before. I gave her sort of like a red or like deep red colored skin. I'm not sure how well it came out, because on the one hand I wanted her to look like she had some sort of unusual, that is to say, non-typical like human skin tone skin. But I think she honestly just ends up looking like her face was peeled off. If I were to try her again, I probably would have done something else with it, but I'm not going to change it when I actually stat her out, so I'm going to just make use of that. Let's see, she's got a big two-handed axe, not quite a halberd, but it's obviously got that sort of fantasy axe proportion that is usually pretty fun. She's got sort of like a green grass-colored base. I might take that into account when statting her out, I might not. And a black cloak. That aside, there isn't a whole lot else I can say about her. I like the pose, it's dynamic, it's exciting. I like the armor. I like armor, particularly women in armor. I just think female characters are really cool. But yeah, so my mind is already kind of spinning with ideas, but I won't exactly know what I'm going to do until I do it. So, now that we've examined her, let's get the old skull out and let's select our system. Alright, now to find out how difficult of a time I'm going to have doing this. Whoops, wrong box. Oh, I forgot I wanted to use the other one for convenience of space. So, let's see what we've got here. Shuffle them around, give them a good shuffle. Okay, pulled one out. All right, good solid choice, Cortex Classic. Let's put it in the big book. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to call her at first, so I saved that for last. But I went with a simpler name. I went with the name Sil, T-S-I-L, but I decided, okay, let's give her a little bit of something extra. So, I also gave her a nickname. I mean, I built her with a reputation of a die 10 out of die 12. Pretty extensive, so I figured, she's pretty well known. She would have garnered a reputation. And so I decided that she had the nickname the Infernal Axe. For concept, I decided to go with Scarred Knight. And that's because, honestly, I wanted to go with what I had initially when I looked at the miniature, and I was just like, it looks like her face is burned off. And I realized, you know what, I'm going to incorporate that. It's totally not a painting mess-up, it's an intentional artistic decision. We love those. But, yeah, so I decided to go with that and go with a Scarred Knight. I decided that I wanted an event in her backstory to cause this, but I really deliberated back and forth for a little bit. I was just like, okay, is this going to be something that she's still sore about, that she perhaps is actively seeking vengeance for? Maybe she was attacked and horrifically scarred. Maybe her home was set on fire. But I decided in the end to go against that, mostly because we've seen it before. A lot of people, just a lot of characters I should say, suffer that sort of cruel disfigurement, abuse at the hands of your fellow human beings or enemies. That sort of leaves the character this sort of scarred, angry person who is seeking vengeance and Well, I always find myself wondering about those people. What are you going to do afterwards? And yeah, obviously, in some stories, that's not the point. The point is not what they're going to do after, because the vengeance is an all-consuming thing. It's the only thing that they have left in life. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to actually have this character have something else going for her besides the scarification. Her character does not revolve around it. So I decided that she was injured, horrifically, in a siege. I decided she was trapped inside of a building, and several enemies rushed in there with her. But during the siege, the building caught fire through some sort of mishap or intention from an unknowing assailant outside, and she had to fight her way out of a collapsing, burning building, and sustained really very extensive burns all over her body that has left her very, very sensitive. Ugly scarification. I wish that Cortex Classic didn't call it ugly. That's a very, very coded kind of word. But its concept is brought across. It represents the fact that she would have a very, very hard time talking to somebody who doesn't know her as a person, who sees only skin deep, so to speak, only sees the vicious scarification. Another thing I decided not to go with was, a lot of times these characters, particularly female characters, when people sort of want to write a character who's like, oh, she's a survivor of this kind of violence, and she's scarred, and a lot of times they are characterized as these cold, angry, determined people. But that doesn't really excite or interest me a whole lot. I mean, what else do they do if they're, like, aside from scowl all day? And it can be interesting. You know, you can see a character sometimes who is so horrifically affected. But in this case, I didn't think it was appropriate. I would prefer, actually, to have a character who has maybe a bit of a sense of humor. Maybe not so much about her scarification, but she maybe has not let it weigh her down. She's had a few years, many years, probably. She's had many years pass between her and the accident. And now she's decided, you know, I don't have to worry about this as much anymore. And she's done other things with her life. So, moving on to her assets and complications, I went with low pain threshold to represent the fact that a lot of nerve endings are still very, very rough, very raw. The scarification in some cases has burned away all feeling, but in other cases it's left her very sensitive. So she would add that die to any difficulty she had to resist pain. I went with ugly at a die 6. I wish it wasn't called that, as I've mentioned, but I went with that to represent the fact that for a lot of people, someone with her very specific, very extensive skin destruction, I think, would be a bit off-putting. I went with reputation at a die 10. This ties into her story since then. I felt she was very, very well known. She wears blue armor, for goodness sakes. And I figured that I should tie that into it. I think she should be well known, not only for her distinct physical skin-based appearance, but also the appearance of her just for the armor and her skill as a mercenary. I made her good-natured. I decided that, in the end, I saw her as somebody who the scarification was not a life-defining event. It gave her a reputation in the eyes of others, but I imagine she has more going for her than just that. I imagine she doesn't fixate on it a lot, and probably at this point, if she doesn't look in a mirror, she probably doesn't even realize it, or remember. I also went with Focused Hunter at a die 2. I decided that for her jobs that she's taken since then, maybe the war ended and she's had to make a reputation or a job set for herself since then, I decided that I would like her to have been a mercenary or some sort of bounty hunter. Maybe she works with groups, maybe she works alone. I imagine it's probably better to work with groups when you're bounty hunting. It just makes the whole process more convenient. I decided to do a bit of decoration and ornamentation on the character sheet. I want to do that just to give a little bit of character to each of them. I did a flaming sword, a little bit of a generic image, but I rather like it. I think it thematically holds together. The combination of martial imagery with the source of a very distinct physical attribute for her. Incidentally, when I was writing it down, I realized that if she had truly gone through the accident or the event that so hideously scarred her, as the miniature implies, I decided that she wouldn't have much hair to speak of, so I decided to build off of the fact that the hair looked kind of fake on the miniature, and I gave her a blonde wig. I figured that she probably has very little or no hair left, and so wears a blonde wig because she prefers to have it on. She might enjoy that. She might take a little bit of pride in the fact that maybe it looks like how her hair used to look. I'm not going to make any assumptions, it's her hair after all. For skills, I decided she was good at running and particularly lifting. I wanted her to be fairly athletic, a bit of covert skill and some craft skill to represent just basic hands-on talents. Great skill with weapons, including axes at a die 12, which is almost as high as it can possibly be for a character of a mid-range level of skill to start at in Cortex. I gave her a bit of unarmed combat and a bit of sword skill as well, just a little bit in case the axe fails her for some reason. For medicine, I gave her scars at a die 8 for specialization, because I decided that she'd probably taken a bit of time to learn how to concoct various balms and salves and lotions that she might use to make it so that on a good day, maybe her scarred and damaged nerves don't give her as much trouble, and maybe prevent her skin from more easily cracking in, say, low humidity weather. I made up the armor that she had. They mostly have half plate in the book, but I went with full plate and decided to give it an 8 wound rating. Might be a bit high, but in Cortex, stun damage can really mess you up, so I figured I'd go with that. I just made it give her a -3 die step penalty to athletics, so she's not going to be moving around too easily anyway. Even though, I disagree with most rule systems that make it so that armor makes it very hard to move. If you look up any videos of people trained in the use of plate armor and moving around in it, it is like a second skin, and they can really do quite a bit with it. It makes me look back very charitably on the rolling around that a lot of characters in Dark Souls do, honestly. That aside, I went with brickwork ornamentation as well down the skill section and the weapons and items section, because I felt that the crumbling masonry, irregular masonry, could represent perhaps a collapsing building and tie in with her backstory. And for the drawing, I decided to go with sort of a bemused, little, just kind of casual sit-down. She's not in combat, she's not even on the job, or perhaps not even actively seeking one. She's just sitting there with a bit of an ale spill, and is, I would say, maybe a little bit ready for action. She's got her axe by her with notoriety 10, or reputation. With reputation 10, you're likely to maybe encounter people who want to challenge you. Oh, you're the legendary Infernal axe. Well, let's see how good you are. You never know, you might just end up needing that sort of thing. In a worst-case scenario. I imagine most people are more bowled over by her reputation and her appearance, and won't challenge her. Albrecht was a wanted man, and he knew his days were numbered. As such, he had hired a few men skilled in the application of deadly force, just to watch his back while he lay low for a while to avoid his crimes and anybody who might come looking for him. There was a knock at the door. The 2 rogues at the table near him jumped to their feet and went to either side. "Enter," said Albrecht. The door swung open easily, and in stepped his worst fear. A woman in blue armor, bright yellow hair looking rather false, and her face was a twisted visage of burn scars and wrinkles and lines. "You did well to find me," he said, standing up and striding in front of one of the hidden cells, giving a secret signal to his ace in the hole. "But I'm afraid you won't live to collect the bounty on my head." "I'm sorry I have to do this," she said, "but a job's a job, you understand." "I understand completely," said Albrecht. Whereupon a knight, all sigils and arms, scarred away from his armor, a man hired only to kill, stepped out of the shadows. She heaved a heavy, false sigh, and said, "Well, if you won't go easily," and she kicked the door closed behind her.